Hello, back with another Keyframe coach review, of course. So, got a piece here from Mike, and let's have a quick look, shall we? Jump straight into it. Cool. Nice. So, I feel like the action and like story and stuff is pretty clear. I feel like there's some things we can do to really push this, and because we're doing like a kind of fighting game style animation, we can really make the poses super dynamic and clear to read, because when you're doing these like kind of fast, as if you hit a button and it instantly punches or kicks, the pose is always like super the most pushed and clear they could possibly be. And there's a few places where we could push that. There's also a few places we could work on the body mechanics and general kind of arcs, particularly like the parabolic arcs. That's a good one to look up, parabolic arcs, um, of just things in the air and just making sure that your arcs are looking realistic when they need to be, and then the poses that are held pushed, really. So, I made some notes. First of all, I was kind of thinking to myself, does this camera need to be like this? And I'm not sure it does. I feel like maybe you could just stick with the second one. Alternatively, you could potentially have this be more of like a rotation thing just to add some dynamism, just to add some dynamism to this first shot, as if it's like just making it feel more epic, as if they're on like a turntable and the camera's circling around them. Could be kind of cool. But at the moment, it just kind of feels like it's not particularly doing anything extra for us, this camera view. So why not make it just one view? And if anything, it's probably hurting us having this like big motion hidden at the start. So it's something to think about anyway. Just because like most of it happens in this sort of area behind his leg. So I guess I can comment on him first. I have done some drawings for her. Don't really have time to do drawings for both of them with their poses and dynamism and stuff like that, but I'll quickly talk through him. So I feel like he's pretty good. Um, this part in particular is definitely my favorite. I feel like you can really feel his energy and weight. It feels really nice. And then this impact, this whole bit just feels super nice. So, really nice job on him. Really feels like he's winding up for something and gets stopped in his tracks. So, I do feel like he's a little bit stiff and just rotating from his hip at the moment. Kind of feel that there's no like compression as he goes back in the chest. And you can kind of see how his head just kind of pops back instantly on one frame. I'm always tracking headspace and thinking about that in animation. And I would probably have this leg like kick out more screen left before he can then like regain his balance. Part of what's feeling a little off about this to me is that he goes into this kind of off balance pose, like he's kind of like, whoa, he's about to fall back, but he's not actually off balance. He's actually balanced. He's over his foot here, right? So I feel like that's definitely a mistake that I made before, where it's like it feels like he's off balance because of the pose, but actually if you look at his balance, because we're so ingrained in animation to make sure they're over their feet, make sure the balance is right, it's actually quite a difficult thing to animate a character off balance. So just take a look at that and maybe add some more off balanceness to it. I think that could be, just having this, so leg be kicked out and then you know, to me that feels a bit more off balance. He's still a little balanced because he's kind of throwing his arms out to catch that. But yeah. And then I would just make sure you're kind of overlapping that rotate X when you're doing like rotate Ys in the hip and overlapping the rotate X of the hips, but also the chest. So you kind of get, you know, when he lands, you get this kind of thing a bit more. So you really feel that like drag of him and his head and just that whole kind of chain where it's a bit more like that as he's not a snake, but you know, it's just a bit more weighty and you can really feel the impact. Because there's some moments here where, for example, here, you kind of feel everything come to a stop together. So it all feels a bit too connected right now. And then here, story-wise, or not story-wise, but I guess acting-wise, feels like he kind of almost gives up. I think it's because he kind of takes this step. So I would either keep him continuously going down, so it's like he's been knocked out and he's like, ooh, and then he's doing like a slow fall because he's really like heavy and it takes a long time for him to fall. So he kind of goes up and then has like some hang time before then as he falls, she stamps him down to really like finalize that spacing. Or I would do a bit more of like a and just kind of have him try to like regain himself before then getting kicked that second time. But at the moment, it kind of what's not working is I think a lot of it is just it all feels quite locked through here in his hips in the translate Y. So just bear that in mind, I suppose. And then I think here when he does his landing, when it, you know, everything settles, it feels like you could just overlap things a little more. So because at the moment it kind of feels like he's almost like a toy figurine, which actually is quite a nice feel. It feels quite nice. But I think what you want to go for is more of a organic, overlappy feel there. So onto her notes that I some drawings. So I reckon here you could probably have this foot facing him and just add to the dynamism of the pose, I guess. So you got straight against bent, and then also have like a bit more of a arc in that, a line of action, sorry, sort of. So you kind of feel this line of action through her body and chest and spine shape. And then here for body mechanics, not so much posing, but it kind of feels like we don't adjust the weight over. So she's in this anticipation pose back here. She would need to move over to transfer that weight onto the front leg before then taking her weight off of the back leg. And at the moment, those things happen at the same time. So I'd actually delay that spin a bit, have it a bit more. So she starts to do that rotation, but it's mostly about getting the translate of the hips and her body over to screen right. So then we're over her standing leg and we can pivot around that. So just think about that when we're transferring weight, to never move the foot before the weight is kind of taken by the other foot. Sorry, got a slightly tickly throat. And then here I was kind of thinking about how can we make this kick work to be a bit clearer. And I was thinking about Chun-Li's kick in Street Fighter. That's Street Fighter, right? If it's not, I'm going to get massacred. But it's a fighting game character, Chun-Li. But when Chun-Li kicks, kind of has like, you know, you have like the peaks, and then this is all just like smoke or steam just smears behind her. So I was thinking if you arc this leg up and then kick through, and then potentially kick up, so you basically, instead of just going from here to here, which is not a huge amount of change, and you would have to kind of do that. I mean, if you wanted to sell that, you could sell that by, having an in-between, which is, this big kind of arc, and you could have a smear that kind of bridges all of that gap. But at the moment, I don't feel a massive arc there, and I feel like you want that arc to sell the motion. So I'd go up more with the leg in anticipation. Just get rid of that. So you see, kind of arc down versus the movement which you have right now, which is barely visible because in screen space we're not actually moving that much. I'm sure you are moving a lot in 3D space, but in screen space we're not moving a ton. And then obviously coming through, and actually what I thought might be good is having a go straight into that step. So we hit the floor with that, and it's like taking out his leg versus a kick and then a step. Because we're going straight from this into that final pose, it makes sense to plant that foot so then she can then transfer the weight onto that foot. And then I'll just be wary of, again, dragging her head, dragging everything in rotate X, making things feel nice and overlappy and organic. And then here, so kind of looks a bit breakdancey right now, but essentially, so one of the issues is the arc of the head. You can kind of feel that go a bit like this in there, and it's just a bit noisy. So I always track the arc of the head, like I said, because that's the thing we're kind of focused on, even if it's subliminal or subconscious, we're focused on that. So I just make sure that your your head arc kind of follows an arc which is like this, versus having any kind of mess in there, which just will take away from the clarity. So probably start further back, give you more room to go. When I play through, you hopefully see what I mean, how this can feel a bit nicer. You kind of see that head progresses along like that, and then I'm getting the hand further underneath, and also getting more stretch on this leg that's planting, before then compressing everything, getting a line of action through the body, which is counter to that. All right, where was I? So headspace, track that, make sure it's nice, always progressing kind of screen right. Nice compression. I think bringing the legs into a clear silhouette would be cool. So they some tracing paper. So we kind of get a bit more, 1, 2, 3 with the lines. Right now they're kind of stacked and it's not super clear. I mean, if you really want, that kind of heels together, close together feel, there's ways of doing that as well. You could potentially have those like that, and then what terrible pose. Really get those knees up high. But I think the important thing is having, that big contrast change, but also the kind of clarity of the three joints in there. And then another thing to note, I guess, is that line of action change through the body. Again, just giving us contrast between our poses. One thing I thought was nice is you kind of do this staggered spacing that they do in anime, where, you have this 1, 2 with a very slight ease, and then a big explosion there. That's really cool, really successful. This is just, I guess, a pose change. Arm goes back a bit, kind of extend, when you extend your bottom half, I guess you would extend the top half as well to really stretch that whole body out. Whatever you can do to kind of get this nice tapering and arrow-like feel to the character when they're squashing and stretching. You know, you're essentially doing bouncing ball squash to stretch when you're doing any kind of motion like this. So it would be nice to maybe point the toes if you can get one leg in front of the other so that, you know, we kind of taper to a point. It would just feel really cool. And then in this recoil, I felt like you could potentially offset those legs so it doesn't feel so like a in-out move. I mean, that's a preference thing as well, I guess. But as well as that, you kind of kick out. So you do an antic with this kind of compression, and then we kick out in that sort of arc. We kick him over there. So then it would be nice to recoil and, you know, feel that, ooh, like she's bashed off of him. So get that lower body and her spine shape and general line of action going back over to screen left into a nice anticipation. It felt like maybe here you could add in that second arm. And this all leads into helping with that twist motion. So if we antic this way with her body and, you know, get this nice reversal in the spine and also, you know, stretch out these elbows, get everything kind of, essentially, again, it's squash and stretch. So you have a stretch pose, and then when you squash down, you kind of want the feeling of making things go into a stretch pose. So, sorry, squash pose. Squash, stretch. So, you know, everything about this is doing that, right? These arms are, I think having these legs swing over is probably a better call than, you know, doing this pose out again. Drew that the wrong way. But it's something to play with. The important thing is the contrast, really, and winding up to then be able to do a big spin in the air. And I think swinging that way to then launch yourself to add some rotation in the air would be more believable than kind of doing this, you know, you're stretching out, coming back here, and then stretching that way again. If you stretch out, come this way, and then go into a rotation, you can believe that a little more, you know? So then again, nice big stretch. And one thing to be wary of here is that, like I said, parabolic arc at the start, where we're essentially wanting to do this arc over here, right? In your animation at the moment, it almost feels like we come up a bit like this and kind of see how she kind of follows that arc along. And then we very quickly kind of snap up here. And the arc is just a little bit messy right now. So that arc should really like flow through the whole body. And when I kind of play that through with the held drawings, you can kind of feel just with like one drawing and one kind of expression of that arc that it feels a bit more archy. So then this drawing is just a lazy way of saying essentially you want a shape which is ball-like, right? So all of this kind of rotation in here, it's all, and like particularly that there, it's all kind of taking away from the flow of that transition into a nice kind of Sonic the Hedgehog ball before then hitting out. And I'm not saying you literally need to make her this shape, but it's a pretty fun thing to do to get a character into this shape. But that's kind of what you're doing when you're doing, you know, if you think about a diver that's, you know, doing one of these rotations where they do like 6 rotations and then dive into the water, they'll get themselves into this very tight ball-like position, and that makes you spin faster. So whatever you can do to kind of treat this as just shapes, but also get that squash and stretch throughout the whole pose will be massively helpful. And then here, I felt like you could kind of tumble out of that into, not really sure what happened here. That is there. Goodbye. Felt like you could kind of tumble into or tumble out of that ball and have this leg up here anticipating. Again, it's in a clear silhouette. I do like what you're doing with the pose. Just feel like you could potentially reverse that spine in anticipation of then reversing it here. So you get that kind of line of action. And then if we're using correct body mechanics and arcs and stuff, she would kind of continue with her head and general body mass in that arc down rather than doing this kind of kick up that she does. See how in the animation you kind of come around here and then go back up before then going down. If you can just keep that, like, that will feel much smoother and it will have a lot more flow to it. This is purely, I guess, continuing that arc down. Must have made a mistake when copying and pasting drawings a bit here. But, you know, it's all just squash and stretch, most of this stuff. Kind of see, one thing to note, I guess, is I was thinking you could make this a bit more pointy and therefore it's like contributing to this general arrow shape that she does. Before then, kind of a lazy squash and stretch drawing, but some form of squash. And then I thought here, maybe it's nice if she actually plants this leg. It felt like she's almost like stomps him down and then it's kind of like does a characterful kind of jump off. It's just an idea, but I think it could help to kind of add some personality and like fun to the animation. But part of that as well is it feels like she's just deliberately holding that foot up. It would just be nice to plant it and then use that to help her body mechanics get over to screen left. Again, take a look at the arc, make sure that we're kind of moving through in this doink. And then when we land here, just one thing, it feels like we kind of land. So we do this nice motion over. And the translate Y is kind of working. So we get, you know, up and then the spacing is, you know, most held at the top. And then we drop down and then, you know, it's kind of doing that sort of thing. But one thing that we're not doing is continuing the spacing over. So you have this kind of parabolic spacing in the translate Y. Translate Y. And then in your translate X, you actually just want to keep that mostly linear. And those things together will give you a parabolic arc, right? So if I, for example, have these translates, so they're kind of in the right place right now. If I move these translate X's, this might make sense. In my head, this is going to make sense. But say I put, okay, I didn't actually match them. But say I put this one here, where they actually are in the... So that's linear spacing, right? And you can see that we're creating a nice parabolic arc through that. So instead of having this, if we, you know, I've used all the colors, but say we have that, which is what we have, and then we move this one much closer, and then this one further along, and this here. If I then kind of plot that on our imaginary graph that we've done, we then get this. And you can kind of see how that very quickly breaks the arc into something that we don't want. So essentially, translate Y as a kind of progressive spacing, and then translate X when it comes to characters being in the air and doing like very realistic body mechanics. You kind of want to make that linear. Hopefully that wasn't just pure waffle and it made sense. But what I'm getting at is start the hips when you land over here, and then that gives us somewhere to settle into with that translate X screen left. So that's all I have time for right now, but I hope that was really helpful. And thanks again, Mike, for sending in your work for review. I've forgotten how to end these. I always forget how to end them, to be honest. Yeah, there hasn't been any Keyframe Coach content for a while, and I just haven't been doing anything YouTube for a while, to be honest. I've been focusing on my day job and focusing on family life, and things are good, you know. I'm doing good. Keyframe Coach is, well, it's this video, and that's it, really. But till next time, see you around.